You're good? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meeting for Wednesday, October 12th, 2022. I now call the meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Cookie, could you call roll? And Chair Robbins is excused from tonight's meeting.
Commissioner Narita?
Here.
Commissioner Lorraine? Vice Chair Rolinski?
Here.
And Commissioner Michael.
Great. The city offers the public two ways to participate in tonight's meeting, in person and virtual. For people who are present in the City Council chamber, there are three ways to sign in to speak to the commissioners. One is to complete a yellow request slip found at the front of the chambers and return to Cookie. Another is to sign in using iPad at the back of the room. And the third way to participate in person is to scan the QR code found on the sign, also located at the back of chamber. For people joining our meeting virtually, there are two ways to speak to the commissioners. One is to click on the Zoom meeting link found on the top of tonight's meeting agenda. Use the raise your hand button to be called upon by Cookie. The other way for people to join our meeting virtually is by phone. That is calling 408-638-0968. Once again, 408-638-0968, and enter conference ID number 82-23-09-59-56-009. Once again, 82-23-09-56-009, and enter the passcode 92-99-35. Once again, 92-99-35, and press the pound key. Press *9 to raise your hand to be called upon. And when called upon, press *6 to unmute yourself and speak to the commission. Speakers have 3 minutes to speak. For those joining us by video, you will see a 3-minute timer on your computer screen. For those commenting by phone, Cookie will inform each speaker when their 3 minutes has expired. Regardless of the method you select, choose to speak with the commission. When you do speak, please let us know who you are and provide us your comments. Next on tonight's agenda is the consent calendar. There is one item to approve, the minutes from the regular Sustainability and Infrastructure Commission meetings of August 10th and September 14th. Do I have a motion?
I move.
Second?
I will second.
Cookie?
Commissioner Narita?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorraine?
Yes.
Vice Chair Rolinski?
Aye.
And Commissioner Michael. The motion passes 4-0.
Okay, thank you. The next item on tonight's agenda is public comment for people wishing to comment on an item not appearing on tonight's agenda. State law prevents the commission from acting on any matters not on the agenda. However, comments are welcomed, and staff and the commission will take note of them and may consider them for inclusion into a future commission meeting. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Okay, no hands raised. Okay, with no hands raised, we will conclude the public comment section and move to the old business section of tonight's meeting. There is one item under old business, and it is a presentation from city staff outlining the city's efforts related to the transit-oriented development pedestrian access plan. So we are to hear a presentation, and the commission is to make a recommendation to or not to recommend the access plan to City Council. We will begin with a presentation from City staff, Nicolette Chan, our Assistant Transit Planning Manager, and Matt Goy, Senior Associate. Is Matt with the consulting firm? Okay, so Matt is a Senior Associate with Furr and Piers. Okay, thank you. Furr and Piers was a consulting firm selected by the city to assist in creating the pedestrian access plan for the transit-oriented development. Everyone will be available, including Sue Ellen Atkinson, our principal planner for the city, after the presentation to take questions from the commission. Once all questions have been presented, I will move to questions and comments from the public to the commission and staff, either made in person or by video or phone. And once all public comments and questions have been heard, I will bring the discussion back to commission for any final questions for Nicolette, Sue Ellen, or Matt. Once the questions from the commission are completed, that will be followed by a motion, once again, to recommend or not recommend the draft plan to City Council. So on that presentation, thank you, Nicolette.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. I'm Nicolette Chan, Assistant Transportation Planner with the Public Works Department.
And I'm Sue Ellen Atkinson. I'm the Principal Transportation Planner, also with Public Works.
And tonight we'll be presenting the draft transit-oriented development pedestrian access plan. Now I'll hand it over to Sue Ellen to introduce the project.
Hi, good evening. So we're here tonight with the draft transit-oriented development pedestrian access plan. And the goal behind this plan is to increase the safety and comfort for those who are walking in our transit-oriented development areas, which are generally about a half mile around our high quality transit stops, which for the city is our 3 Caltrain stations and our El Camino bus stop for Samtrans. This project essentially is looking at those TOD areas because in those areas, there's an expectation that there's a higher use of transit. And we've looked at the bicycle path of travel in the TOD areas as part of our 2020 bicycle master plan. And now with this plan, we're able to look more closely at the pedestrian path of travel to transit in those areas so that those who live, work, or recreate in those TOD areas can more easily and safely walk to transit as is hoped for in those areas. And this plan overall aligns with the City Council priorities to enhance pedestrian safety. So as I mentioned, we focused on a half-mile radius around our high-quality transit stations. So in San Mateo, we're really lucky that we have 3 Caltrain stations within the city limits. And we looked at those as essentially 3 primary study areas with a slight overlap for 2 of them. So we have our downtown study area around our downtown San Mateo Caltrain station. We have the Hayward Park study area around our Hayward Park Caltrain station, and then the Hillsdale Caltrain station study area as well. And now I'll turn it back to Nicolette to go through the draft plan.
Thank you, Sue Ellen. So here we have the different components in the draft plan. They're each 1 chapter, and I'll present each of them individually today. So first, we have our community engagement and outreach chapter, which gives an overview of the outreach we conducted, and that included pop-up events, flyers, and an online interactive mapping activity. The draft plan also provides a summary of the feedback that we heard. Within Appendix A of the draft plan is a detailed summary of all the community feedback that we heard. I did want to highlight one major success about the outreach is that this is actually the first project where we engaged with people in person at Mi Rancho Supermarket and the Peninsula Regent, which is a senior living facility, and it was successful in engaging with the target audience at both locations. Next up is the needs assessment chapter. The needs assessment summarized what we heard from the feedback from outreach and also what we learned from the existing conditions review. The graphic you see here is from the draft plan, and it kind of looks at the existing conditions within the downtown study area. From the needs assessment in the downtown study area, we have an opportunity to improve access to the northbound platform. And that means we would make improvements to streets just north of the Caltrain station so that those transit users coming from the north have better access to that northbound platform. Within the Hayward Park study area, one of the needs that was identified was improving crossings, specifically on the east side of the station. Many of them are missing or need improvements. And then within the Hillsdale Caltrain station, we identified that there is sidewalk missing on the west side of Delaware Street, just south of 25th Avenue, and improving that would greatly increase access to the entrance to the Hillsdale Caltrain station on 25th. We also have a chapter stating the priorities and recommendations to identify our project locations. The first step was prioritizing where our projects would be located. We presented this to the commission back in February, but I'll provide a brief reminder about that. So here on this slide, we have the metrics that were developed and each were assigned a weight according to how they aligned with the goals of the plan. We then took these metrics and placed them on a map, and where they overlaid the most is where our project locations were identified. And on this heat map, it's shown with a purple line or a purple dot. From this heat map, we created our project locations. So here we have our downtown study area, and we see there are 3 projects that are generally grouped by geography, and they are the El Camino, North Station Access, and the Downtown Gateway. Within each of these projects are individual improvements that can be implemented separately from one another, and this gives us the flexibility to implement them at different times while still achieving the overall goals of that project area. In the plan, we have cut sheets to show those improvements within each of those projects. So here we have the downtown study area as an example, and this is our North Station Access project, which shows the streets that are just north of the downtown Caltrain station. The icons shown here represent an improvement, and all these improvements collectively improve safety and comfort for those accessing the downtown Caltrain station from streets north of the station. These icons are defined in the Countermeasure Toolbox, which is within the Priorities and Recommendations chapter. The toolbox was created to directly respond to the needs that were identified in the needs assessment. And something that's really neat about this toolbox is that it can also be used for other roadway and streetscape projects that are unrelated to this plan. And there's one more location where we use these icons, and that's within the cost estimate tables. Each improvement has a cost estimate, and some of them even have 2. So the first cost you see here is a quick build cost, which allows us to implement the improvement in the more near term using more temporary and affordable materials. And then there's a hardscape capital cost, which is the cost for the full build out of that improvement. The cost does include a percentage for planning, design, and construction management. So it's already built into these cost estimates you see here. And the overall cost estimate project cost for the plans is estimated at $22.5 million. I do want to state this is a very high level cost estimate, and there are multiple variables that could change in the design phase when it comes to implementing these improvements. The draft plan also includes strategies and an action plan for implementing the projects in this plan. The first one is leveraging other projects. This is something we already do for other bike and pedestrian projects. So looking at what other city projects we have going on and trying to incorporate those bike and ped projects into those. For the draft plan, what we've proposed is to continue to do that to implement the projects in this plan, while also look to projects that are hosted by other transit agencies to see if we can incorporate projects into their plans and projects. And those agencies could be Samtrans, Caltrain, or Caltrans and Caltrans. The next strategy is grant funding. As you know, this is also something we already do. For this project, we want to focus in on those grants that support pedestrian and bicycle safety, because those are the best fit that are most likely to get awarded for the projects that are in this plan. And the third strategy and fourth strategy, I'll state here, but I'll go into more detail on the next two slides. The first, number 3, is integrating into transit-oriented development. And the fourth one is funding with local resources. Just a heads up that these two strategies have policy considerations tied to them, and I will get to that later on in this presentation as well. So strategy number 3, integrate into transit-oriented development. Currently, we require developments to construct pedestrian facilities along their frontages, and we do that through ad hoc exactions and conditions of approval. We do have challenges with developments fully meeting city standards due to conflicts in the municipal code, adopted plans, and limited right-of-way. So what the plan proposes is that we look at options to make sure that developers are able to fully construct the right-of-way, the sidewalks to city standards. And we would look at a number of options, and just to name a few, they would be circulation changes and right-of-way allocation. Strategy number 4 is funding with local resources. As mentioned previously, we do apply for grants, and for bike and ped projects, we also try to implement them using capital improvement program funds or CIP funds. The challenge here is that we are limited with the amount of CIP funding that we have. Proposed in the plan to implement the projects in this plan, we will continue to try to use these CIP funds to implement projects and use CIP funds to meet that local match when applying for grants. We'll also conduct a fee study to look into potential new fees as a new revenue source. And that fee study would look at a potential fair share private developer contribution fee and a vehicle miles traveled or VMT impact fee. And I'll go into those more on the next slides. So a fair share contribution fee is a proportionate fee that's collected from private developers. Those fees are then used to fund improvements to a portion of the right-of-way that's anticipated to be impacted by those developments that contributed to the fee. This plan establishes a nexus, and that's a connection between the project and the improvement. And in this case, that nexus is that developments within TOD areas increase capacity on pedestrian facilities leading to transit. And so having this nexus supports our ability to develop a fee study to look into a fair share contribution fee. And then those funds would be then used to fund improvements in this plan. The next fee is the VMT impact fee. Qualifying developments are required to reduce the amount of vehicle trips from their property to a less than significant level. And they do this by implementing on-site mitigation measures. And those could include providing transit passes for their tenants or having an on-site transportation coordinator. And the intention of those measures is to help tenants realize their travel behaviors, give them the tools, and hopefully they will reduce the amount of vehicle trips that they take. This plan proposes a VMT impact fee, which would provide an option for developments that aren't able to reduce their VMT to less than significant amounts through strictly implementing on-site mitigation measures. And so those funds collected through this fee would then be used towards projects that reduce VMT, like the ones identified in this plan. And so just to recap, strategies 3 and 4 do have policy considerations tied to them, and we will ask the City Council to weigh in on these when we present the draft plan to them. The first consideration, again, is considering options to ensure the pedestrian facilities are constructed to city standards. And then the second one is conducting a fee study to evaluate 2 fees, the fair share private developer contribution fee, and then the VMT impact fee. And we welcome your feedback on these tonight. So tonight, again, we are asking Commission's feedback on the draft plan, on the policy considerations, and ultimately we are looking for a recommendation to move forward to City Council, and would incorporate any feedback received from Commission. After tonight, again, we will incorporate Commission and public feedback into the draft plan before it is presented to the City Council next month. And we are also working on finalizing the environmental documents for CEQA. Thank you. Myself, Sue Ellen, and Matt Goyne, the project consultant from Fair and Peers, are available to answer any questions you may have.
Let me just, are you planning to review any of the projects in the 3 transit zones? It's just a question, yeah.
Not at this moment. We do have the cut sheets available as backup slides. So if you want us to bring up any of those to talk about, we can do that.
Okay, all righty, great. Okay, well, on that, we'll open up with Commissioner Narita in terms of questions that she may have for staff.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the presentation and the really beautiful report. Very impressive stuff. So really appreciate it. So I have a couple basic questions and then maybe some more detailed questions. Could you remind me how often would this plan be done? And like, is this like a 4-year plan or a 3-year plan or?
We don't have a specific cycle through which we update our active transportation plans. For example, the Bike Master Plan was first done in 2011 and updated in 2020. For this plan, we don't have a date set for revisiting it. It would also be rolled into the Complete Streets Plan, which may have more of a set update schedule. So at this time, we don't have any set date at which we'll revisit this.
Okay. And then, so I'll just go kind of maybe chronologically in my own thinking on this. I'm curious to learn more about any reflections you had on the outreach and engagement process and any lessons learned from there. I really appreciated in February how we talked about one of the priorities of the city was to reach out to Latinx community, disabled community and senior citizens were also flagged, and youth, right? And so just wondering any reflections that you had on successes and lessons learned in that process.
Sure, thank you for that question. I think the fact that we did so many different types of outreach, so online, also focus groups, but also in person, gave us the ability to kind of look back and see what worked and didn't work. And in this case, we also were targeting certain groups that we normally don't hear from, so like you said, seniors, youth, and the Latinx community. And so I think by looking back and seeing what worked and didn't work, I think that's where we find our insight. And so, for example, with the Latinx community, we found that even though we did a focus group, there weren't as many participants, but as soon as we were at Mi Rancho Marketplace, we were able to kind of catch them where they already are. And we found out that they were very open to talking to us. And then as far as youth goes, I think we still have to figure out better strategies to get them. But I still think, with seniors also, we were able to partner with the Peninsula region, and they also had great feedback for us that we came to them, and that we actually had seniors that were pretty excited to talk to us and had prepared notes. So they're definitely open for future outreach opportunities for us to come to them.
Awesome. And I was curious in the kind of the assessment of the circles around the Caltrain stations. you know, there's considerations about things within those circles that were identified as concerns, but don't rank into priority. And there are some like just gaps, right? There's like a 4-block gap on El Camino between the two circles of like downtown Caltrain Station and Hayward, for instance, right? And so I was just curious if you could talk through like understanding, we'll go into priority areas soon, but like for the non-priority areas, what happens?
For the areas that are outside of the study areas for this project, we are just about going to kick off the complete streets plan for the city. And that will look citywide, both with community input and then a data-driven analysis to look at safety hotspots and determine priority areas and locations in the city for very similar types of improvements, but across all modes. So while an area may not have been studied in this project per se, the complete streets plan will be looking citywide. And then through any outreach that we did in the pedestrian access plan, if it was outside of our study areas, the comments were still captured and carried through.
And then and then within the circles, what happens to like, because there's like, you know, you identify several priority areas, but then you also note things like, I really like this word, it was like, there was a global consideration or something like that around like connector streets in Hayward and Hillsdale. But when you look at the priority areas, like they're mostly around the stations themselves and not the connector streets. So like what happens with that sort of data?
So I think that similar to what Sue Ellen said, with other plans and projects that are going on, we'll try to use that feedback that we heard and incorporate those projects into those. And I'd also like to invite Matt to chime in on responding to this question.
Great. Thank you, Nikki. Can you nod that you can hear me? Great. Yeah, I think one important part about this plan is to make sure that it was implementable. And so having a focused amount of priority projects the city can move on quickly is going to be really important. And then recognizing that, you know, the city throughout this entire transit area has, you know, a lot of streets with opportunities to, you know, upgrade the pedestrian facilities. And so that's where that first implementation strategy of leverage other projects, you start there. Anytime the city is revisiting, you know, designs or repaving the street or looking at, you know, fixing maintenance, there's a toolbox now that the city has that applies to those types of features. And then also in cases where there's redevelopment, as mentioned earlier, there's the strategy of incorporating improvements into there as well. So there's and also note that for El Camino Real, Caltrans, there's a variety of strategies to engage with Caltrans on a holistic complete streets corridor. And that is a part of the general plan, one of the general plan draft policies as well. So there's a lot of connections here to use the information, the countermeasures and information here to continue to build out as opportunities arise.
If I may, Commissioner Narita, this plan the scope was very specific because there was an opportunity to apply for a grant. So it focuses on the TOD areas. However, the city is expansive and this plan doesn't limit us. It provides an opportunity for definitely to encourage that path of travel to public transportation. But indeed, the toolbox will allow us to make sure that we look at the city in a comprehensive way, which we have been doing over the past few years.
That's great. Thank you. I wanted to also clarify on the metrics priorities. I remember Nicolette in February, we talked about the high, medium, and low, and just wanting to confirm that the methodology stayed the same, where like high got like 3 points and medium got 2 points and low got 1 point, right? And so like there are other considerations out there that got 0 points, right? Like those are just the things that you wanted to focus in on. And then I noticed that in the February draft, there was like a thing about vulnerable communities were getting one of those assessments, but here it seemed like there was a more global consideration of vulnerable communities using the Cal Enviro screen. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so with the prioritization process, it was streets that provide direct access to the Caltrain stations had the highest amount of points. And then next was feedback we received from outreach, and then collision data. And then after that was everything else. I believe the Environmental Index was with the feed, where it was the medium priority level, but I'd have to look back. But correct, what we showed you was it stayed the same. There weren't any changes to that. Matt, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. So the Cal Enviro screen was really meant to enhance any locations that might not have showed up with the other metrics that were on the map, to make sure that access was being provided to those neighborhoods. And that's why a couple of those projects show up in the quadrant, the north central neighborhood.
Thanks. Great. And then in the cutouts, when it says the word consider, in like consider something versus like an action word of like doing a thing, what does the consider mean? Like, is that because you have to coordinate with Caltrans or something, or is it that needs to be studied further? I just wasn't clear.
So there are a lot of times where we're looking at something and we go, we could do this or could do that. And at this time, because we're not ready to implement and to do a full design, we may not have the traffic data, the volumes, the speeds available to us right now to make that decision on if we go one way or the other. So those sorts of things. And if you look at the project list, we did try to list all the possible options. When we do get to that point and we go, oh no, we can't do option number 1, we already know what option 2 or 3 is that's on the table. And that's also part of the reason why the cost estimate I provided is a high level, because we don't know if we're going to do options 1, 2, or 3.
Thanks. And then on the implementation strategies that you articulated, thank you so much for highlighting 3 and 4, because I didn't pick up on that in the reading quite the way you did. And I was just curious, so if council, makes those recommendations, process-wise, does number 3 and 4 come back to commission and then go to council again? Because I assume 3 is a municipal code change and 4 is a assessment of whatever the fee study becomes.
That's a great question. Both 3 and 4 would necessitate additional study and recommendations. So for the option to consider options in order to implement pedestrian improvements to city standards, that would involve quite a bit of analysis, including probably several municipal code modifications. So that would be a longer process, including research, bringing that to city council. We can bring back to the commission if desired. For the fees, those would not automatically be implemented. We would have to conduct a fee study that would be pretty extensive. When you're talking about a new fee and creating a nexus, those are very in-depth studies. So those would require considerable time and effort. And as yet, both efforts are unfunded.
Okay, great. 2 more questions. We got some really thoughtful public comments on the TOD plan, which I really appreciated. And so thank you to the public for that. And I was curious if you could speak to, one of the comments was about the fact that the Burlingame Caltrain stop, while not in the city of San Mateo, there is a part of the city of San Mateo that is within the TOD radius for that. Could you speak to that? Is there coordination with the city of Burlingame on that front?
As Azalea had mentioned, this was a grant-funded effort. So when we went in with the scope, we highlighted access to San Mateo-based Caltrain and Samtrans transit opportunities. So that comment was a great thing to bring up. For a Burlingame-based Caltrain station, the improvements that are closest to the station are outside of City of San Mateo's jurisdiction. So we could have looked at the outlying areas that are within the City of San Mateo, but then would necessitate improvements within Burlingame, which we obviously don't oversee, in order to fulfill improving for the full path of travel. So I think that was really a great comment that was brought up. It's something that were we able to have a different scope for the grant possibly could have been included would likely be looked at as part of the complete streets plan moving forward. But I think that in the effort that we're making in terms of pedestrian access to our transit opportunities in the city, it is an opportunity to have that conversation with Burlingame about if they're doing anything similar.
Great. And then finally, we had great public comments that cited 3 California laws that I believe may have been recently passed. I don't follow California law like the latest, so I'm ignorant on this front. And I was wondering if you could speak to any adjustments that this plan would need to make in light of those new laws and the timeline of those potential adjustments, if any.
Sure, I can do that. I apologize. I have notes up. So SB 932 was approved by Governor Newsom on the 28th of September. And that essentially extended a CEQA. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong one. That requires upon any substantial revision of the circulation element of a general plan on or after January 1st, 2025 to incorporate principles of the safe systems approach from the FHWA and to develop bike plans, pedestrian plans, et cetera, that incorporate those approaches. So as you're all aware, we're currently undergoing a general plan update right now that's slated to be completed in 2023. And so that's prior to that January 1st, 2025 date. So any edit to the circulation element after January 1st, 2025 would need to align with SB 932 from my reading, and hopefully that's correct. But elements in our draft circulation element do align with that. So I hope you're all following the general plan effort and are engaged in that, as I know some of you are. SB 922 was approved by the governor on September 30th, and that extends the CEQA exemption for bicycle and pedestrian projects. So that's something that we have been excited about recently. Certain bicycle and pedestrian projects, when implemented, are exempt from a full CEQA evaluation. So this bill extends that exemption through 2030. So that's really great in terms of particularly these improvements, that many of these will fall under that, and we won't have to do a full CEQA evaluation for these projects. And then finally, AB 2264 was approved by the governor on September 23rd, 2022, and requires a state that when there's a placement or replacement of a state-owned or operated traffic signal, that pedestrian priority is implemented. So that would be on signals that are owned by the state or Caltrans. So that would require Caltrans coordination, and that's something that we'll look into further. But that would be a Caltrans requirement to do when they're upgrading or installing traffic signals.
Great. Thank you so much. Those are my questions.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Thank you. So I think because Commissioner Narita had so many great questions, Vice Chair Narita, some of my questions may focus a little more on funding. I think my first question would be on looking into some of the mechanisms that were described earlier, the leveraging projects such as, I guess, smooth streets and other ongoing initiatives in the city, maintenance and so forth, and CIP. I think I just wanted to maybe get a high level thought from staff on whether the likelihood of whether some of these priority projects might be funded in one or one of those ways in, say, the next couple years. Like, is there an upcoming streetway project that might allow for some of these to be implemented sooner rather than later?
So with currently So currently some of our projects are underway. We are working in downtown. We have a big slurry seal project. We're also working in areas where the pavement restoration effort is a lot more significant. So we have our Smooth Streets program sort of planned out for the next 2 years, and we'll be completing that effort in 2 to 3 years. So as it relates to these areas, our pavement management program, we won't have the opportunity to include these in the next 2 years because that programming is already laid out. But with projects after that, we definitely will.
And on the cut sheets, we do have these little icons, and one of them is the city logo. And so wherever you see that, that means that we do have a city project that's upcoming in the near term. And on the text part of the cut sheet, it should mention what that project is at the bottom of it. So you can see what project that is.
Huzzah! Excellent. Thank you very much. And then to dig a little more into the other funding mechanisms, some of the new ones that the city could implement. In fact, I wonder if we could potentially go back to the slide in which we talk about the two big ones. One question I had, maybe just for clarification, is staff currently thinking about these as only being implemented in the transit-oriented area of the city? That which is being looked at tonight, for example, around our 3 stations in El Camino, or broader?
That answer needs to be addressed separately for each of the fees. So for the fair share private developer contribution, if it's the improvements that are in this plan, the fair share for these projects would be, the nexus would be to projects that are built in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Were it to be more broad pedestrian improvements brought in from other plans, there's a potential that something could be developed citywide, but the intention of this statement is for these projects in this plan. So it would be projects that are developed in this area. For the VMT impact fee, most projects that are developed in the TOD area are actually screened out of CEQA analysis, so they don't need to do a VMT analysis because of their proximity to high quality transit, because they're providing less parking, et cetera. So it's likely that a project that needs to mitigate VMT is outside of the TOD areas. But that mitigation doesn't need to be on site or adjacent to their site necessarily. It can generally reduce citywide VMT, which is where it would be able to apply to projects in the city that serve to reduce VMT, like pedestrian focused projects. So the VMT impact fee would be citywide, but would likely be something that projects outside of the TOD areas would be more likely to utilize.
Interesting. Thank you. There was a public comment about potentially adding a police bicycle patrol. And I thought we actually already had some portion of that potentially existing within downtown. I wonder if that's the case, or, I mean, I suppose something more official and structured is being proposed here, but I wondered if, don't we have at least a little bit of bicycle enforcement at this time?
We do. We would have to follow up with our police department to assess how that is programmed and what areas, how that basically operates.
Of course. Thank you, Director Mitch. Those are my questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioner Michael. Yep.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to play the I'm new card. So if I ask anything that was covered, or this is my first time seeing the plan, have patience. So first, I would like to also comment how well done the plan is. I like that it feels like a very implementation focused and not something that will actually collect dust, but something that could be picked up and used. And when grants do come up, it's all laid out on how to the support to get those grants. So that's really well done. Some questions is something that I think about for making things more pedestrian friendly is to think about nighttime. And there is discussion in here and recommendations for lighting, but I do think there could be a bigger discussion about just that there was the analysis or thought put into nighttime commuting from the transit stations in and out. And some areas are unlit at night, and to make the walk safer at night, because or just in the dark, early morning or night. I think that could encourage people to use transit during those hours if they come home late and so on. Another question I had is, these are prioritized projects, but I do think it could be helpful and maybe at a later stage, but it's hard to know when you look at these cutouts, which are beautiful, but which ones are the most bang for your buck? Like what will make the most difference? For example, do straighten crosswalks work as well as a curb extension or so on? So it would be helpful to know when we're trying to allocate funding or prioritize the projects, what would go the furthest distance in actually improving the pedestrian access in these locations. And then just one question for the fair share and VMT impact fee. Was that just for new developments? Is that?
Sorry about that. Yes, that would be for new developments at the time of the project approval.
Okay, thank you. Oh, one more question. And maybe this is, I may have missed it, but it was introduced as strategy 3 and 4, but I didn't see a reference to that in the staff report. Where did strategies 1 and 2 go?
Sorry, in the AR, we were trying to keep it brief because there was a lot of information, but 3 and 4 was kind of built into the last part of the AR where it talked about the policy considerations.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
I have a few questions here. Just so I understand, so we are tasked to recommend or not recommend the draft plan to City Council, and that may include some comments from, this draft could be updated based on comments from the public or the commissioners. That's my understanding. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay.
We would incorporate feedback from tonight.
Okay. And then will City Council be, will they be approving a final draft, or are they approving the final TOD? Pedestrian access plan. What will they be doing?
We would be bringing the final plan to them for adoption.
Okay. So essentially, this is really the last public discussion prior to going to City Council.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. On the funding, the fair share contribution fee and Commissioner Michael had talked about, you mentioned that is for new developments. So that money would be used in the immediate area to provide pedestrian access or offload additional traffic in the area. How would that money be used?
The intent of the fair share contribution would be to develop a new funding revenue source in order to implement the plans in this project. The projects in this plan. Okay. And so if I had a development built in southern San Mateo, let's say Hillsdale and El Camino, and there's a fair share contribution fee, that money would then stay in the immediate area? Because assuming that's in the Hillsdale TOD, or does it go somewhere else? It would be in the intention that the funds would be used for the projects in this plan. I think that we would need to do some analysis in terms of what is feasible and what is allowed, and what makes the most sense in terms of that revenue source when we're doing the fee study.
Sure, okay. And then there's the developer's impact fee. Is that still around? Or is that being replaced by the fair share contribution fee?
Are you referencing the transportation impact fee? the
Yes,
TIF?
yes, right.
So we do have that. These projects, in order for a project to be funded from the TIF, it needs to be in the project list. Since this is a new plan, these projects are not in
Right,
that list.
got it.
So the fair share developer contribution fee would be a new revenue source to fund these
For these projects specifically for
Correct.
this, and the TIF is for projects outside of this plan.
The TIF is for projects that are identified as part of that fee study.
Right, that fee study,
Mhm.
right. Okay, got it. Thank you. In your outreach, did you reach out? I did see a focus panel related to those that rely heavily on wheelchairs. And you reached out to those groups of people.
Yes, that's correct. I believe it was a regional the Samtrans paratransit group, and we held a focus group meeting with them.
Okay, and they're here in the city of San Mateo and whatnot.
I don't know, at the time when we met with them, they were online. I'm not sure where they meet, but it's more of a regional, not a
Regional.
local.
Okay, all right. So then my question here is, there was a citywide ADA assessment done in 2020. It came out with recommendations. Will the work outlined in this TOD, in the TOD PED access plan, does it meet what is required in that citywide assessment?
Yes, so as part of the existing conditions assessment, we did take the data from that ADA assessment and we looked at that. So wherever there's an improvement that's identified as a project in this plan, we did incorporate those ADA improvements that were identified in that assessment.
Right. So your ADA work was not only the outreach to the regional group, but also referring back to that. And that was a fairly comprehensive and from my point of view, pivotal assessment. Okay, so we'll take care of that in that respect. Okay. I'm now going to just dive into the specific maps here. I'm going to look at just the downtown, specifically the El Camino. And I just have questions. Explain to me what is a protect left turn? Because I see that on the, specifically on the downtown El Camino Real, and it's at El Camino on 3rd, 4th, and 5th. So what is a protect left turn? What does that look like?
So I'll just start with an unprotected, which means you would be left turning and yielding to both cars coming the other direction, as well as pedestrians. So a protected left turn would be you would get a green arrow and it would just be those left turning vehicles that are going.
Okay, got it. Okay. And so therefore there's no, obviously there, you can see, and I had a question regarding any traffic circulation patterns, and no, there would not be from that.
There may be some delay for some movements as a result of implementing protected left turns, but we would have to do some traffic studies. So that's why, to go back to Commissioner Narita's question, why some are considered, we do have to do those traffic analyses prior to implementing.
Got it. Okay, very good. All right, then that answers also the protected left at much needed Bovit and the 17th Avenue intersection there, much needed. And I will mention, by the way, there was a letter here from Ms. Wolnick, and she had a very good recommendation that might be worth considering in this plan. She mentions to add a no turn on red from the ECR at El Camino Real onto 17th. And in doing so, she does point out that does protect two crosswalks. That is the one north-south on 17th and east-west on the El Camino. But that could be, that's a relatively straightforward, and I realize traffic is a very gooey, I call it a gooey situation. But it could be worth considering. The only thing I see, by the way, is a backup, if there is a backup onto the on-ramp, that 92 off-ramp onto El Camino. That's the only thing that catches my mind. But I do want to put a plug in for that for possible consideration, and it does address two crosswalk issues. Let's see. The Hayward Sunnybrae, let's go to that. And let me just, because I wanted to just ask about, let me just see here. Yeah. I just want to find out which one it has to do with the land owners. Let's see, the Sunnybrae. It's Park East. No, let's see. Okay, yes, it's on the Sunnybrae. Yeah, Hayward Park, Sunnybrae. Here, it mentions work with adjacent landowners to formalize the bicycle pedestrian path from 18th Avenue to the Caltrans, to the Hayward Station. Who are the adjacent landowners? And what has to be done with them?
I'd like to ask Matt to assist with responding to that question.
Sure, thank you, Commissioner. So that's referencing, there's a parking lot there right at the end of where the intersection of
Right.
South Railroad and 16th Avenue is. And so I don't know who the landowner is, but that would be, a step that the city would have to take for implementation on that is because right now the pathway dumps into the parking lot and then there's no ADA exit there. There's just a driveway with a chain across if you look in Google Street View. So either, in terms of implementation, there's the redevelopment opportunity where the redevelopment would provide a pathway, or the city would have to find a way to acquire right away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt.
Through the chair, if I could just add to that, there was a recently approved project at Concar Drive and the Hayward Park Caltrain Station parking lot. And that is including a pedestrian access path. So this recommendation is actually partially in the works through that private development project.
Got it. Okay.
Just to add on to Matt's comments.
All righty, good. Okay, thank you, Matt and Sue Ellen. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my questions. I'd like to go to the Hillsdale projects. I know the Hillsdale Boulevard very well because I travel it at least twice a day, several times a week. And I want to first start with the Hillsdale 28th, Bay Meadows, the Hillsdale Boulevard of the Hillsdale maps. And I noticed that there is a potential, a project over on the Edison and Hillsdale Boulevard. And that is much needed, by the way. Traffic from roughly 7:30 to 9 a.m. backs up from Edison and will actually go past and will go in the 7:30 a.m. traffic. I'm sorry, the 7:30 a.m. traffic actually goes from Hillsdale through Edison and into and continues east. And then in the afternoon, the traffic backs up starting at Edison and heading west past Hacienda. And all of this is simply because you've got Laurel School letting out or starting, you've got Hillsdale High letting out or starting, you've got the College of San Mateo letting out or starting, and then you've got the hospital. and it can back up east or west depending on the time of day. So, the thought here, as one who has been in that many a times, is what do you think? There's a signal or a roundabout, something needs to be done. Right now it's a 4-way stop sign. And I see the recommendation to remove the westbound left turn pocket, get that, that's onto Edison. But what is your thought on a roundabout to move traffic?
I think on this is a great example of specific locations where there are options that we can look at. So as Nicolette went into, we have our project areas and our projects that are all comprised of different of separate improvements. And what that boils down to is each of these is going to become its own project in the future. So this is a great example of that, in that we would need to do a project at Hillsdale and Edison to determine which of these options makes the most sense. So I can't speak offhand right now without having any information about a signal versus a roundabout, but this is a great example where this plan identifies the need and the goal and gives options for how to accomplish that.
Right. Okay. All righty. Yep. And I don't even know if it's even feasible, but some sort of mediation, for lack of a better term, is welcomed. I want to go to the Hillsdale 25th Avenue.
Actually, Chair, before you do, if you don't mind, because I was, you mentioned removing the left turn pocket on Edison made sense to you, but actually I was curious if we could if staff could just explain why or.
Sure. Okay.
Just before you move on. Thank you.
Yep.
And I'll defer to Matt to respond to that.
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner. This is a really challenging location, as you acknowledged, and anywhere where there's a multi-lane 4-way stop sign like this requires careful thinking. And so the left turn was identified, remove the left turn pocket because it had the lowest volumes based on counts that were collected before the pandemic. So whether or not that's that doesn't necessarily need to be the final outcome, as Sue Ellen just explained, further study, but that would be one way to reduce pedestrian exposure, because right now pedestrians are crossing 5 lanes, and even being able to expand that median to create a refuge there would reduce pedestrian exposure.
Right. And can I say something about that, Matt? Because I know this intersection very well. I've been living by it for 23 years. While I say it makes sense, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea either. Partly because that left turn is used by the ambulance and employees of CHOPE. They use Edison to get from Hillsdale to the CHOPE Hospital. So, so thank you, Commissioner Lorraine, for bringing that up. I understand it makes sense, but I don't think it's a good idea. And I would remove that just simply because of that's the way CHOPE and the ambulance get from Hillsdale to the hospital.
Yeah, and even just for a little more clarification, what's being suggested there is to remove essentially the ability to turn left there, like removing a lane, replacing a lane with a median, and having that particular intersection, westbound cars given the option to go straight or right and no longer necessarily going left?
No, it was just thank you. There's no better experts than the local experts, such as yourself. The suggestion was just trying to reduce that approach from 3 lanes to 2 lanes. And certainly in a feasibility study, if, would take into account any sort of those considerations. That being said, that could also be removed, and that could be, that could be evaluated anyways, just as the feasibility study looks at all these different traffic patterns that you're describing in more detail.
Right.
If I could just add to that, there's no indication here to restrict left turns. It's just to remove the focused left turn pocket. And again, this location is a great example of where we have options to consider, but we would need to do a more in-depth analysis through a separate project. But left turns would still be enabled here. It might be a through and a left. It might, we don't know what
We
that
don't know.
geometry would turn out to be, but it's not suggesting a left turn restriction.
Okay, all right. It's just removing the pocket itself.
Correct.
Okay, yeah. So the last thing you want to do is then have the staff use Hacienda because that's packed up with Laurel School, dropping off all their parents. Okay, thank you. Any more? Is that? Okay, right, but thanks. I want to go now to the Hillsdale and 25th Avenue map. And here it calls for potentially a road diet on East 25th and a build out of curb extensions at the Palm and 25th Avenue intersection to discourage parking and stopping. There are a lot of businesses along 25th Avenue and obviously when I talk to businesses, they're exceedingly sensitive when vehicle traffic is reduced or making it more difficult for their customers to get to their storefront. Are there plans, should this be considered, to reach out to them? They look to me to be an affected stakeholder.
Yes, we would definitely reach out to all the businesses in this area at the time or before we implement the project. And I just want to clarify on the potentially removing parking to put the curb extension. It would just be those spaces kind of below and right of the dot at the intersection, just so that within the intersection, we don't have cars parking.
Oh, God. All right. Yeah. And there are, by the way, some storefronts there. I think there's a dental office, and look, they're small businesses. And I would say, in order for me to recommend the plan that if this is considered, the road diet and the extension, and I hear what you're saying, it's only a few spaces, but those spaces are used by those businesses. That we reach out to them before anything is done.
And it's a few spaces across the entire intersection, so not a few spaces on one given side, for example. But that does discourage parking in the intersection so that pedestrians have more visibility. But just wanted to note also that we are making a much greater effort in terms of community engagement during our projects prior to implementation. So in the design phase, reaching out to affected residents, businesses, et cetera,
Absolutely.
to get feedback and where there are elements where there could be options to get feedback on those elements. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Yeah, because I mean, while you reached out to a group of individuals, seniors, Latinx and youth, there are impacts, some of them very minor, some of them less so. But we have to reach out to our businesses and to our current residents.
So Commissioner Roinski, if I may.
Sure.
So there have been a few comments and we have touched on this in terms of lessons learned. For us, the North Central project was
That was a big one. Yeah.
was challenging in many aspects, but we are working on reassessing our public outreach we are developing a better strategy, and that involves assessing impacts during the planning phase of projects, not leaving them toward the end of design when we're ready then to finalize and then bid out.
Right.
So there's a lot more pre-planning now. Commissioner Narita, you've brought up very important points. How do we reach certain demographics? We learned through North Central that mailing surveys turned out to be very effective. So part of the lessons is knowing the community, figuring out the best way to reach them. And it's going to take a lot of effort because we do have different means of communicating. And in some cases, it's going to be very specific to the neighborhood.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And, like I said, we can all focus on the project itself, but it ripples out and North Central was a learning lesson for all, I think. Okay. One more question here on Hillsdale Boulevard. And this has to go with, this is the Hillsdale Boulevard map under Hillsdale. And this is removing the right turn slip lanes, pockets, northbound and westbound. Would someone still be able to make left turns, or are we eliminating left turns altogether? That is removing the right turn slip, northbound and westbound. Is it just removing the slip, or is it just no right turns at all?
And I'll defer to Matt to answer that question.
Thank you, Commissioner. A lot of great questions here. The right turns would still be allowed. Slip lanes are,
Right.
yeah, a safety challenge for pedestrians. And so this would just provide a better crossing for them while allowing right turns to proceed at a slower speed.
Right. Okay. And if I was to put a plug in for pedestrian safety, once again, I know Hillsdale Boulevard very, very well. If I'm heading west, I go through the underpass, and then, it's a little bit of a blind curve as I'm doing that on-ramp to the El Camino, but I've seen some very, very close accidents from pedestrians. Right now, the crosswalk is barely visible, but something in that area I believe needs to be looked at, because it is a blind curve. I've seen a lot of close calls, and what happens is residents, I see people, they're getting off at the bus station, the Samtrans, which is just about a couple hundred feet north, and they're running from that bus probably across to the El Camino to catch another bus, and they're not looking. So I think I would add that to the mix. Excuse me. And even if I was to go on to the east side, the less of an issue is, I don't think I would focus on the one that's on the west side. As soon as I go through the underpass and I'm getting on ramp onto El Camino, like I said, it's blind and pedestrians are running and cars are going fast. So I would add that into your mix. Okay, thank you. I have no further questions. Thank you, everyone, for indulging me. Cookie, do we have any speakers?
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. Oh, boy, this is most unusual. I think in all my years, I've never had this happen. Okay, well, then if there's no hands raised, does anyone have final questions? Commissioner Rita? Commissioner Lorraine? Nope. Okay. Then on that, okay, go right ahead.
Okay, just for some more clarification, thank you for your patience with me. But as we're talking about these funding mechanisms, it would seem to me, if you could just maybe confirm or correct, given what we were discussing just a moment ago about how the fair share sort of contribution fee may be focused more on the projects within the TOD areas themselves, and the VMT impact fee may be something that could be implemented citywide. Is it fair to say that the what's being considered is potentially both of them together, so that we have two different ways of obtaining funding for these projects, from both the projects in the TOD area and from projects outside the TOD area?
It would be the intention of a fee study to look at both options. For the fair share contribution, that would be for projects that are being developed in the area to pay their fair share of improvements to the pedestrian network that their residents or employees would be using. For the VMT impact fee, that is an option that would be available if a project were not able to fully mitigate their VMT impact through measures on site. So it would be an option available in terms of mitigating a VMT impact under CEQA. and they do serve separate purposes. So I think the intent of the fee study would be to determine if one or both are feasible and how to allocate those and implement.
Okay, and I think Chair Rowinski, one of her questions about which projects might be benefited by, I think specifically the fair share, just to clarify that, it sounded like, I mean, it seems as though the intent is to potentially allow for some of these projects in a development's exact area to be effectively paid for by the developer itself through this fee. But I think what I heard was that it may not necessarily be that directly connected.
Well, if I can add, so that would be assessed through the fee study, but I think a point of clarification is what this plan does by identifying those improvements and depending on the location of the new development, it establishes the nexus. It says, yes, there is a relationship between this development and making the path of travel safer to public transit. So it depends on the location of the development, but what this plan does do, it defines that relationship. How much in terms of a fee is what then we would assess, and then we would assess the then specific implementation. But this plan is important because it does say there is a relationship there.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot more study to do.
Yeah. I guess I was just curious, like as an example, and I'm sorry if I'm missing something in your answer, Director Mitch, but I think maybe it would be instructive to consider a potential example that in the priority projects or something. But if if something were built, I guess right next to a priority project, for lack of a specific example. And I guess maybe in this hypothetical, a fee study was conducted, council decided to move ahead with a fair share contribution fee. Would there be, I guess like maybe this is yet to be determined as well, but do you think it's, I mean, is the intent at this time, is the vision maybe to allow for a development being built next to a priority project to fund that particular priority project through this fee?
Well, there's a difference between a project being directly in the frontage, which that relationship is there, and we actually condition projects, versus the path of travel. So the distance between, so beyond the frontage, the distance between that project and the path to public transit, what are the improvements beyond that this fee could pay for? So the critical piece, and this is why I feel this plan is very important, is because we don't have a nexus right now that connects a developer to that path of travel. So that is what this plan does. How much, and how it would be implemented, that would be determined as part of the assessments in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Through the Vice Chair, sorry, I do have one more question now that I think about it. Thank you so much. I was curious in terms of next steps with any of the specific projects. Are there any other updates that go to commission about this, like details, if it's like a particularly thorny project and it's like big, or do they just kind of move along process-wide after the path, like assuming this plan is approved?
We do make an effort to include updates on pedestrian projects at our quarterly-ish updates to the commission. If it's a particularly large project, that maybe we could consider a separate item for commission, but we do regularly collate together all of the ongoing projects and present that update.
So these would flow into the updates that we get from you regularly, Sue Ellen, is what I'm hearing.
That would be the intention.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Any other questions? Everyone? Nope. Okay. Well, then let's make a motion to recommend or not recommend the draft plan. Huh? Sure. Do you want to do comments? Yeah, please. Yep. Okay. Comments? Yep.
Cool. No, we're supposed to, that's okay. Okay. So thank you so much for this plan. I feel really great about it, actually, especially seeing the whole flow from February till now and everything. And I think, again, like I really loved the layout and the usability of it. And also like you highlighted some like celebrations, right? Of like wins that the people liked. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. We should celebrate our wins more. So great job, I think, on that whole front. So I feel really great about this plan. I am super curious how Complete Streets will turn out like after all of this, because it just feels like this is adding another stick in the basket of sticks or whatever metaphor you want to use of stuff that the Complete Streets, we're kind of riding like a lot on the Complete Streets plan to coordinate and align. And that makes me a little nervous, but I'm not nervous about this plan. I'm just nervous for you in terms of connecting this plan and all the other plans we hear about to Complete Streets. And however the commission can support on that process, and maybe it needs several updates or something. It just feels really big. It really does, but very exciting. I still have my pet peeve, Nicolette, about the high, medium, and low, because I don't love the optics of saying youth and seniors are low priority. They're not. They were actually given priority. And I know there's like a little thing that says like, oh, relative to the other things, this was considered low. But like, you know, the last thing we need is like any sort of like social media or like whatever saying like youth and seniors are low priority, because that is not true. That is not what the plan is saying at all. And so I just don't love that frame, to be totally honest, but you're prioritizing all of them. So it's not really a genuine assessment in my opinion. I feel the excitement on this commission and I share it in terms of really unpacking what the implementation strategies number 3 and 4 will look like. So it does sound like it would be great if those could come back to commission when ready. That would be my recommendation, so that we could dive more into the details of those things should the commission, should the council approve the plan and make those recommendations. I do think that they should come back. And then just looking forward to all the updates project by project, and I will second Commissioner Ruinski's assessment of Hillsdale Boulevard. I live in the Village. I just took that right turn and underneath the underpass from Hillsdale to El Camino, and there was a blinking light. And I was like, what's that blinking light for? And then I realized, oh, pedestrians. And it was dark, you know, when I was driving over here, literally right before this meeting, I did it. And I was like, oh my God, it's dark. And, you know, and then I was fine, everything worked out, but I was just like, man, this is on point for tonight. And so just wanting to flag that. In addition to all the other pieces of the toolbox, maybe like lighting or flashing lighting on the crosswalk, even like just something, because that was dodgy. And maybe some additional overhead lighting too, because that was tough. But like stuff like that around individual projects, I'm sure that we'll be really excited to engage on, you know, as the regular updates come in. So I'll save any other comments for those times when things become more real. But overall, I'm just really excited for this plan. Great job to you, and thank you so much for all your hard work.
Commissioner Lorraine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, staff and consultant, for the work on this. It's, as has been described, quite important. It's important for pedestrians in our city, which includes all of us, and youth and seniors who are a high priority in our city. It's important for improving access to our transit, making it easier to use, more convenient, safer, which is something we need to do if we want transit-oriented development to work as well as possible. it's important to have a plan, and it's important to have a list of priority projects for transit-oriented developers to consider adding to their proposals as public benefit. As has been noted through the funding discussions, to have the ability to really draw that literal through line from the projects that are being built in our transit-oriented areas, and how they could impact, how they can impact our city, and also how those who are going to live there and work there and interact there are getting to those places and from those places. So this is connecting a lot of dots, and I appreciate the work. As someone who often walks to and around both the downtown and Hillsdale stations to take Caltrain, or to take part in some of the local economy surrounding it, a lot of the recommendations in the priority projects resonate with me, especially a crosswalk at Hillsdale Station underneath 28th. And the station itself, it's a big one. I know a number of people made public comments about that throughout this process. And when it first opened, I thought to myself, yeah, maybe. But now that I'm in and around it, it's a high priority in my opinion as well. Also lighting at 28th and Flores, I saw in that 28th sheet. And to me, I've recently spoke with some folks who live in the area who mentioned how dark it is. And indeed, when I'm coming home from the train, it does appear quite dark as you head east. And a crosswalk on the east side of Hillsdale by El Camino Real, for sure, is sorely needed, to dovetail with some of Chair Rowinski's comments. I support the city considering zoning changes, et cetera, to allow for developers to upgrade their pedestrian facilities to comply with city standards. And I support conducting a fee study for to determine whether a fair share contribution fee and or a VMT impact fee could help fund these important projects. Thank you.
Thank you to both. Commissioner Michael.
I don't have too much to add, except I do think it's an exciting project that will probably be referred to many times as these other projects go through. And I too support the two strategies, if that's what we're doing now.
We'll do a recommendation when we're done. We have to formally do that motion. Yep. I too like this plan. I really like the fact that some of the ADA projects outlined in that citywide ADA assessment have been incorporated and brings those areas up to what we'll call legal threshold is obviously very, very important for the city as well as those that have to use these facilities. And I just have a few comments once again to consider Ms. Walnick's suggestion on a note read at would be, I guess, the southeast corner of Bulvett and 17th and ECR. And that's by the Starbucks. We all, we actually use, that's the Starbucks in front of the Starbucks. Might be an easier way to say that. Once again, I think something that was missed was that pedestrian crosswalk. Once you go under, as you're heading west on Hillsdale, and you take that off ramp onto El Camino, and you'll see, go there, and you'll see what I mean. It's a blind curve, and like I said, right now all the crosswalks is virtually invisible. And it might need some repaving. I mean, just look at that. That I think needs to be included in here as well. And then I really liked, Director Mitch, your comments on bringing in those that may be impacted, the businesses, the residents, just every normal day residents, in addition to the residents that you spoke with, the seniors, the youth. Always keep an eye on those that need the wheelchair access. They're really critical, but just residents and businesses. I really like that way of thinking and bringing that forward. So that's all the comments I have. I think we just have to make a motion to recommend or not. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, Cookie, roll.
Commissioner Narita,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorraine,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rowinski,
Yes.
and Commissioner Michael. Motion passes 4-0.
Great. Okay, thanks, everyone, and a good discussion and good questions. We're going to wrap up this evening. We've concluded old business, and the final item on tonight's agenda is reports, announcements, and meetings of interest. Does anybody have anything they would like to share?
I'd like to share something. Just we would like to actually thank. We received a lot of letters of support for our second attempt to a grant for our downtown grade separation project. So a few months ago, we applied for a race grant. We did not get it. We applied for a second one, submitted on Saturday, and then we're gearing up for another opportunity next month. So really appreciate the letters of support that we did receive, because this is a big effort that we need to start studying now. And that would be separating all the at-grade crossings in downtown.
Right. Yep.
So more to come. Hopefully we can get some funding.
Good. Good. Well, I have something I thought was kind of interesting. At the last meeting, I talked about the importance of recycled batteries to power electric vehicles. And my husband and I were at the Hillsdale Shopping Center about a week or so ago, and there's a Vietnamese car maker. They make electric cars. The maker is Vinway. So we went in, and so they have a showroom at the shopping center in the what would be the north section there. And their showroom spills off into, I guess that must be 30th or 31st, whatever road it goes north-south underneath through the shopping center. But they explained to us that all their cars come with a program to recycle your battery. That is, if and when your battery needs to be replaced, there's a program where it will be taken and you will be given a refurbished battery. And so it's a formal program that's part of buying their car. So needless to say, we were both happy to hear that and thought I'd share it with everyone. So, which means they're out there. Okay, great. If we have no more final comments, our next commission meeting will be Wednesday, November 9th, starting at 7 p.m. And this meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone. I didn't see the gavel.